Hello, welcome to the channel and thanks for watching. And in this video I'm painting a model that's been on my pile of shame for a couple of years now, the Biologus Putrifier. Never really had a need for it in an army, so I never painted it. It's been sprayed black and sprayed in this lead belcher undercoat for a couple of years, had to brush the dust off it, but I thought I'd get it done because the Death Guard Codex is coming out fairly soon, sometime later in 2025, and it's inspired me to pick off some of those little projects. Now, starting it off slightly differently to how I would do a standard Plague Marine, with the Agrellan Earth you see there, which is a crackle paint that on in a decent layer in certain patches of the armour and on the base. It gives a real nice cracked effect that we're going to do and see later on. Moving on then to the Retributor armour, which is all the brass areas, so the shoulder trimmings, part of that injector he's carrying, and then the housings, whatever you call it, around his kind of poison bottles. So fairly similar paint scheme to how I do a standard Plague Marine. There are two Plague Marine painting videos on the channel. One that I did a few years ago now, which is kind of standard Marines, and then I did the Kill Team set and did a little bit extra on that. Now this is going to be a little bit more than I would normally do on the Kill Team Marines, for example, because I think when you're doing your characters, you want to put a bit more detail. Now, talking about that Agrellan Earth, if you watch carefully as I'm painting the Beastie around the base, I snap off a little bit of one of the flakes, and that can be the danger of using this Agrellan Earth. You've got to be quite careful when you paint over it, otherwise you'll break pieces off and it ruins the effect. In this instance, I've moved that flake, placed it back onto an area of the mud, and just used paint to sort of stick it down, and it will stay there. When we're painting the armour later, though, you've got to be really careful you don't break off those flakes, otherwise you've just kind of wasted your time, really. So just about being careful when you paint over them. Now, using a deep yellow colour, and this is going to be where later in the video I'm going to put Nurgle's Rot, fantastic Nurgle paint, just over where all these kind of poison bottles are leaking, and then the ground is doing that to tie it in with the rest of the army partly, but it also gives that nice sort of Nurgly effect. I do find it works a lot better over a yellow base coat though, adds a little bit to the colour, so we're putting those on all the poison drips and those kind of things. Now, you saw there, I wouldn't ordinarily do the base before I do the vast majority of the model, but I have done, and then taking the black from the base rim into the pipes and tubes that are running off, his mask, also round to the sword that he's carrying. I do all my kind of plague swords in black, and then when you put the Nurgle's Rot colour on it later, adds a nice effect, so tying that into the rest of the force. Now onto the armour. Normally, if I was doing a big batch paint, I would do the Retributor armour colour, which we've seen for the brass, and then I'd move on to this Death Guard green for the actual armour, and I would do that in a whole batch first. Because it's an individual model, I kind of bounced around and played with what colours I was doing at what time. Now you can see when I'm putting it on here, being very careful over those areas where I've put that Agrellan Earth to make the armour crack, not to fill in the gaps, don't put too much paint on, don't prod it too hard. And also you'll notice when I'm painting over the rest of the panels, I'm not covering every single part of this silver colour that's on there. So all where the bullet wounds are, or just around some edges, leaving that lead belcher spray undercoat showing, so it's going to show battle damage. These are not meant to be pristinely painted armour. These are Nurgle's warriors that have rotted over years, etc. So leave lots of those base coats showing where you're doing the armour panels, and it helps to add that rust and battle damaged effect. Now this is the skin colour, painted it onto the actual head that's dangling from there, is Rakar's flesh, and I'm also dropping it into all the areas where the model has these pre-built in sort of bullet impacts that's pushed through the armour and into the flesh. So this is going to be the kind of flesh colour, and we're going to work on it a bit later. A few tentacles on this model, same colour, Rakar's flesh onto the base of the tentacles, and then while it's still dry, dropping some Screamer pink on the end of the tentacles, blending it together to give a nice kind of very, very super quick wet blend, and then multiple colours showing through. So I've put the pink on, cleaned the pink off the brush, and just using a slightly damp brush to blend the colours together while they're still wet. So what you'll get that flesh colour near the armour, bright pink at the end, and a series of tones of pink in the middle. Now onto the skulls. Now the skulls in this case have been used for kind of the poison bottle bases, so imagine it's full of whatever Nurgle concoction has been made up, and then there's a bottle head at the top. So I'm painting the skull but not going up the bottle head, because we're going to look at those later. The rest of my army has yellow eye lenses, doing something a little bit different for the character, so I painted it in a flat red on the 3 eye lenses at the front there. Just again, visual difference. You could do it exactly the same. Your lenses in your army might be a totally different colour, but it is a great way of making characters stand out whilst also theming the army together. Now these growths that are coming out of the Putrifier's back, I've seen them done wood, I've seen them done metal, I've seen them done black. I've chosen to do a kind of nice woody colour, so it's beige brown, to represent the kind of a semi-natural growth coming out of his back, and then picking a red leather colour to work on the leather straps that are kind of hanging off the model. Now the section around his waist, I do the whole thing in the red leather colour because it looks more like a cloth than it does like wood growing out. So there's two nice sort of muted colours that work well together, and will sort of blend in with the general tones. Now the bottles on the model are something that's radically different, and I'm going to use 4 different colours. The Prussia blue you see there, a sick green, a scorpion green, a dark green. Now the dark green is the glass colour, so I'm choosing that as a glass colour here. So you've seen I've painted the blue to sort of 80% of the bottle. Then I'm taking some of the dark green, painting it directly onto the top of the bottle, and then moving up to the bottle neck where the bottle comes out of the leather strapping. Now I'm doing that when, again, the blue is still wet. So it then blends it together slightly and hopefully will look like liquid sloshing around inside the bottle with the dark green kind of showing of the bottle colour. So same here, this is now the sick green, so it's slightly more vibrant green, but again doing the same thing, painting the bottle, the liquid at the bottom of the bottle, and then taking the darker green colour into the top. Now, foolishly, when you come to the really bright green, the scorpion green, the footage was focusing on my fingers, so I haven't got any footage of doing that, but you will see that later. I'm going to do some final touches after the wash stages we do later. But working on those multiple different bottle colours, again, where the skull we talked about before, where they're using skulls as kind of the bottom of the bottle, taking that dark green and painting the bottle neck in that pure green. You can see there how vibrant that scorpion green is on the bottle in his hand. Just didn't get any footage of painting it, but I've done the same process there with the dark green at the top. Now I'm using royal purple onto the robes because if you've watched my videos, you'll know that that's my Death Guard kind of Vectorum colour. So pulling him into there. Now I haven't got a Death Guard army at the moment, to be honest. I have a horrible tendency of selling things. When I get bored of them, I play to them. I've done a lot of demons at the moment, but I am going to add in a lot more standard Death Guard into the army, and I'll use the purple scheme again, tie it in together, and weirdly you will see things that I've painted already, then I've sold, and I'm going to paint them again. For me, the hobby is about the painting the thing in, and sometimes when you've got dozens of the same thing painted up that you're never going to play with, I move them on, I start again. Very strange, I know. Now, this stage here is a sepia game wash. This is one of my favourite things. It's a dirty brown wash that I put all over the model, and it really does grimdarkify the kind of army. Now, you could use a Games Workshop sepia shade, and if you do the Games Workshop sepia, you don't have to do a lot of these follow-on stages, but I think these follow-on stages add that little bit extra to it, so we've really dirtied it down. Now it's about using the same colours we've already used to bring the kind of colour back up again, but it will leave lots and lots of tones. So just dry brushing the grey onto the base there. Again, you'll see not going into the gaps and cracks, leaving the sort of darker colours showing through, and actually we're not putting a totally flat paint onto each cobble. So each cobble has actually the sort of lots of different colours showing through, but it's all just from that grey and then the wash. Now you saw me do the brown area. Don't touch the yellow because we're going to do that later on with the Nurgle's Rot, and onto the armour. So I always paint off a wet palette for standard paints. Metallics, I'll use a little popper pot kind of thing, or you could use a standard slate or a palette or something. But I paint all these colours off a wet palette. So they have been on the wet palette, in this case, probably for about 48 hours. Now, mix them back up on the palette so you don't get any excess water in, etc. You might want to put some fresh on, whatever. But this is a very, very thin layer of paint that's going over here. So we're not putting down the same level of paint we put down the first time. We want to leave it slightly opaque, is that the right word? Probably, so that the colours and the kind of browny murk shows through that paint layer, not going into the gaps and cracks, staying away from the areas where the bullet impacts and everything shows, so that we get lots of nice different colours and tones showing through. Slightly different onto other areas, so onto the wood here and onto the leather strapping, I'm not covering every area, I'm literally just using the same colours I've already used and doing a bit of an edge highlight just around the wood and the straps, etc. Now, talked about this bottle before, how I didn't show it being painted, but I'm taking that scorpion green and literally putting a light wash over the area where the green was, because I want this to be quite vibrant and the rest of the bottles are kind of dulled down a little bit. I don't put it over the top area. Now, taking the same tiny bit of this flesh colour into the bullet impacts, just really at the bottom part of it. You see there I put a little bit too much in, so I took some out. Same thing with the skull. So really this stage it's a relatively easy stage. We're working with all the same colours we've used already after the wash stage, and either just dry brushing over or just doing a very gentle edge highlight to bring it up. Now when that flesh is dry, we put some of the flesh colour in the bottom again. I'm taking a Majos purple and putting a tiny amount in and running it onto the armour so it looks like it's going a bit kind of manky, diseased, etc. on that flesh and running into the armour. And this is a stage that I don't do in standard Plague Marines. It just adds a little bit extra to the characters, and just that's a little bit of extra detail and depth, and contrast paints are great for that. Mantis Warriors green onto the flesh. I've done only again slightly gone over the flesh again with a slight highlight, but nothing too extreme, and then use this Mantis Warrior green to add that level of it's going rotten onto the flesh, a little bit onto the skulls, but not too much. Now here's a stage, something I've only been using for the last few weeks, Dirty Down Verdigris. Did a whole video on how to use the Dirty Down products a couple of weeks ago. So just putting it around the rivets, and then when it's dried, taking a damp brush and taking it off the top of the rivets, because I want it to sit around the rivets on the armour. I don't want it to be really overpowering, so it's a very, very gentle amount I've used. Now at this point I've given the model a varnish, so I use Games Workshop's Munitor and varnish. Adds a little bit of a sheen to the model, but it protects it. It is going to be a gaming figure after all, so you're going to make sure you keep that paintwork safe. But going on there with the Nurgle's Rot onto all the areas where we've put that yellow, also dropping it onto different areas of the base. But what works really well is where you've got that yellow coming out of the bottle, as you can see here, putting the Nurgle's Rot over the top of it makes it real nice and shiny. And that's one of the reasons to do the Nurgle's Rot after you've varnished, because if you varnish over Nurgle's Rot, it loses the kind of silky luminescent shine that it has. And that's the model done. I'm really happy with it. It's going to tie in really nicely with the rest of my army. Really nice little individual figure, and I'm kind of enjoying digging some of these out from the pile of shame and getting them done. Zoom in a little bit, hopefully you can see the cracked armour with little bits of where the rusty horribleness shows through, because you can't actually see the silver showing through because that silver's now been covered in that wash layer. Makes it look rusty and horrible. So hope you enjoyed this little character. Plenty more Death Guard content on the channel to come, so like, comment, subscribe, and I'll see you again.